On a cold November evening in 1969, a beloved young nun vanished into the darkness of Baltimore. Sister Catherine Cesnik, an English teacher known for her warmth, creativity, and deep compassion, was found 2 months later, her lifeless body discarded in a remote garbage dump. What at first seemed like a tragic, isolated murder soon unraveled into something far more sinister, a horrifying web of abuse, corruption, and cover-ups buried deep within the Catholic Church and law enforcement. At the heart of it all was a priest cloaked in power and protected by institutions meant to uphold justice. But Sister Kathy had seen the truth and paid the ultimate price for trying to protect her students. Her story, long silenced by fear, would eventually spark a movement of courage, healing, and the relentless pursuit of justice. This is not just the story of a murder, it's the story of those who refuse to forget. It was a bitterly cold afternoon in November 1969 when the final school bell rang at Archbishop Keough High School in Baltimore. Students flooded the hallways, eager to escape into the early dark of autumn. 16-year-old Jean Hargadon Weiner was among them, but unlike her classmates, she wasn't heading home. Instead, she followed Father Joseph Maskell, a priest deeply embedded in the school's daily life, to his light blue Buick. The sight would not have alarmed anyone. Maskell was a familiar figure, charismatic, commanding, and beloved by many. He was trusted not just by students, but by parents and parishioners alike. He baptized babies, officiated weddings, said Sunday Mass, and served as the school's chaplain. He often gave students rides. On the surface, this seemed just another instance of his seemingly generous nature. But this time was different. As the car pulled out of the school lot, it didn't follow the usual route toward Jean's neighborhood. Instead, Father Maskell drove past the Catholic hospital, beyond factories and warehouses, and into the desolate outskirts of Baltimore. The farther they went, the more uneasy Jean became. Silence filled the vehicle as they moved away from any sign of life. Then, without explanation, Maskell pulled over at a remote garbage dump, a place devoid of houses or businesses. "Come on," he told her as he stepped out. Confused and afraid, Jean followed him across the dirt and debris. Her heart raced, not understanding why they were there. That's when she saw it. Near a dark green dumpster lying crumpled on the frozen ground was the body of a woman. Her aqua-colored coat still clung to her like a shroud. Jean froze. She knew instantly who it was: Sister Catherine Cesnik, known affectionately to her students as Sister Kathy. The young nun had vanished a week earlier, sparking panic and prayer vigils across the community. She was the teacher who brought Shakespeare to life, who played guitar and wrote musicals, who listened without judgment and made each student feel seen and valued. And now she was dead. Maggots crawled across Sister Kathy's face. Jean dropped to her knees and tried to brush them away with trembling hands. "Help me get these off her," she pleaded, turning to Maskell in desperation. But instead of helping, the priest leaned in close behind her and whispered chilling words that would haunt her for decades. "You see what happens when you say bad things about people." Jean didn't understand it fully then, but she had just witnessed the fallout of one of the most shocking crimes in American religious history. A murder meant not just to silence Sister Kathy, but to bury the truth she had been ready to expose. The story that began with the disappearance of a cherished teacher would spiral into a dark revelation, one involving abuse, power betrayal, and a community's complicity. What Jean had witnessed was no accident. It was a warning. And Sister Kathy's death was not a random act of violence, but a carefully orchestrated silencing. Catherine Cesnik was just 26 when she vanished, but she had already become the heart of Archbishop Keough High School. Her students saw her as a real-life Maria, from the sound of music, radiant, kind, and full of life. She infused her classrooms with creativity, made literature thrilling, and offered a safe haven for girls struggling under the weight of family expectations or personal trauma. Her small apartment in southwest Baltimore, which she shared with another nun, became an unofficial sanctuary where students gathered to sing, laugh, and find comfort. But in the fall of 1969, something changed. Sister Kathy left Keough to teach at Western High School, a public school. She told people she was looking for new challenges. In truth, she had seen something terrible, something happening right under the noses of school leadership and the church. On November 7th, 1969, she went about what should have been a normal Friday evening. She cashed her paycheck at a bank in Catonsville, bought a gift for her cousin's engagement, and stopped at a bakery. Multiple witnesses saw her. Then she disappeared. When she hadn't returned by late that night, her worried roommate called two priest friends who contacted the police. Her new green Ford Maverick was discovered illegally parked just a block from her apartment, unlocked, undisturbed, and suspiciously placed, despite her having a designated parking space. It was as though someone had returned the car, deliberately wanting it to be found. For 2 months, Baltimore was consumed with finding Sister Kathy. Her face appeared in newspapers across the state. Volunteers, police officers, students, and strangers combed wooded areas and parks. Prayer vigils lit the darkness. Still, there was no trace. Then, on January 3rd, 1970, 2 hunters stumbled across a decomposing body at a remote landfill. It was Sister Kathy. She was still wearing the coat she'd had on the night she vanished. The autopsy revealed marks on her neck and a round hole at the back of her skull, a clear sign she had been struck with a heavy object, likely a hammer or brick. The details were grim. Investigators initially doubted Jean Vayner's account about being shown the body until the maggots she had described were confirmed by the forensic report. Detective Nick Giangrasso was assigned to the case. At just 28 years old, he could tell immediately this wasn't random. The body, the car, the lack of struggle, it all pointed to someone Kathy had trusted. But as he tried to dig deeper, the resistance became suffocating. Everywhere he turned, doors closed. Pressure from higher-ups mounted. Suspects disappeared behind walls of privilege and power. The trail that might have led to justice was growing colder by the day. And the name that kept surfacing, the man who seemed to hold the key to everything, was none other than Father Joseph Maskell, the same man who had taken Jean to that dump and made sure she never forgot what she saw. Detective Nick Giangrasso sensed something was wrong from the very start. The investigation into Sister Kathy's murder wasn't just difficult, it was actively being derailed. Every time he tried to make progress, powerful forces seemed to intervene. His gut told him the crime wasn't random. The way the body was dumped, the untouched car returned to its usual place, and the complete lack of evidence at either scene all pointed to an orchestrated effort to conceal the truth. Someone had lured Sister Kathy away, murdered her, and ensured nothing was left behind to trace the crime. And whoever that someone was, they had connections high enough to make sure police didn't dig too deep. The first major suspect was Father Gerard Koob, a Jesuit priest who had once been romantically involved with Sister Kathy. Before taking his final vows, he had proposed to her. She declined, but the two maintained a deep friendship, even writing love letters to each other. 3 days before she disappeared, Koob called her from a Catholic retreat, telling her he still loved her and was ready to leave the priesthood if she would leave the convent. After her disappearance, police brought Koob in for questioning. His alibi was solid. He had been out to dinner with another priest and seen Easy Rider at a downtown theater. He had ticket stubs, a dinner receipt, and passed 2 lie detector tests. Despite lingering suspicions, the church's lawyers stepped in quickly, insisting that unless Koob was going to be charged, he be left alone. The police were forced to back off. But a second name came up repeatedly in Jangrasso's interviews. Father Joseph Maskell, unlike Koob, Maskell wasn't a soft-spoken academic. He was powerful, intimidating, and entrenched in Baltimore's institutions. He was not only a priest at Keogh, but also chaplain for the Baltimore County Police, the Maryland State Police, and the National Guard. He drove around with a police scanner and a loaded gun, often inserting himself into law enforcement activities. Maskell's close ties to police gave him the appearance of a cop-priest hybrid, part holy man, part enforcer. But his brother Tommy was a respected lieutenant in the police force, giving him even more protection from scrutiny. "We're a police family," Jangrasso later recalled. That alone made Maskell dangerous to investigate. Every time Jangrasso tried to bring Maskell in for questioning, the priest was unavailable, traveling too busy, or somewhere else entirely. Eventually, Maskell became the department's top suspect, but no one could get close to him. Internal pressure began mounting. Jangrasso's superiors repeatedly questioned how much longer he would pursue the case. He felt the message was clear: stop digging. Worse still, when Sister Kathy's body was found outside the Baltimore city limits, the case was transferred from city police, where Jangrasso worked, to Baltimore County Police. That was Maskell's turf. He was their chaplain. To Jangrasso, it felt like no coincidence. As the investigation stalled, the church's influence seemed to grow. Priests were shielded, documents were withheld, and the community, so desperate to believe in the sanctity of their clergy, was hesitant to consider that someone so revered might be capable of such horror. Eventually, the case was declared cold. No one was arrested, no charges were filed. But the questions remained, especially about what Sister Kathy had known before her death and why that knowledge had made her a target. To understand why Sister Kathy had to die, one must first understand who she was and how her unique presence disrupted the silence surrounding Keogh High School. At just 26 years old, Kathy Sesnick had already earned a reputation as a teacher who went far beyond textbooks. Her students adored her. She played guitar, wrote musicals, and made Shakespeare's plays come alive. She invited her students into her home to talk about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Her apartment, shared with another nun, became a refuge for young women navigating strict Catholic households and turbulent teenage years. For many, she was not just a teacher, she was a lifeline. Gemma Hoskins, one of her students, would later say, "She was the reason I became a teacher." I've never met anyone like her. Sister Kathy noticed things other adults ignored. She could tell when her students were anxious, afraid, or hiding something. And she wasn't afraid to ask questions. That made her beloved, but also dangerous to those with secrets to keep. In the spring of 1969, something changed. Kathy abruptly left her position at KO and took a job at Western High School. Publicly, she said she wanted new challenges. But those closest to her suspected something more. Behind the scenes, she had learned of abuses happening at KO, horrific acts committed by men who were supposed to offer guidance and protection. Maskell and his associates had turned the school into a hunting ground for vulnerable girls. And Kathy, after listening to her students' stories, had started to gather information. She was planning to expose the truth. On November 6th, the night before her disappearance, Kathy hosted a former student in her apartment. The two spoke for hours about the ongoing abuse and what could be done. Suddenly the door burst open. Maskell and Father Magnus entered uninvited. Maskell stared at the student, clearly recognizing why she was there. The student fled, but the damage had been done. Maskell now knew that Kathy was building a case against him. The next day, Maskell called that student into his office. He held a gun and made a chilling threat. "If you ever tell anyone what you know, I'll kill you, your boyfriend, and your entire family." That very same evening, Sister Kathy went missing. Unbeknownst to her, powerful forces were already in motion. Her errands that evening, cashing a paycheck, shopping for her cousin's engagement, were innocent steps in a carefully monitored routine. But she never made it home. Someone had decided she would never speak another word. The young nun, who had devoted her life to protecting others, was silenced before she could reveal what she knew. Her body would later be found dumped in a ravine, but her spirit would live on, igniting a decades-long fight for truth and justice. Beneath the polished surface of Archbishop Keogh High School in the late 1960s lay a festering darkness, one that Sister Kathy had begun to uncover before her death. The school, with its neatly uniformed girls and devout Catholic rituals, seemed like a model of discipline and tradition. But behind closed doors, it was the hunting ground for one of the most horrifying abuse networks in American history. At its center was Father Joseph Maskell, a man who used his roles as priest counselor and police chaplain to prey on the most vulnerable students. Thank you for choosing my video among thousands of videos out there to watch. Helping me with a subscription of yours is very small but very big and too valuable. Maskell's office was cloaked in the illusion of safety and spiritual guidance. He told students he could help them cope with stress, family troubles, or even spiritual guilt. Girls who were acting out or struggling emotionally were often referred to him for counseling. In reality, these sessions became the setting for systematic sexual abuse, often disguised as therapy. Teresa Lancaster, a soft-spoken junior at the time, remembered how it began. She had been caught with marijuana, and her parents were furious about the boy she was dating. When she was called into Maskell's office for guidance, she believed it was her only chance to stay in school. Instead, she was assaulted. Maskell undressed her and forced her to sit on his lap, all while insisting this was a sacred, godly experience. He told her he had found that physical contact helped him heal others. Confused and frightened, Teresa said nothing. I was in total shock, she later recalled. Like many victims, she didn't immediately process what was happening as abuse. Maskell was manipulative, trained in psychology, and adept at using his authority to twist reality. Some girls were convinced he was helping them spiritually. He even played Irish folk music during the assaults, creating an eerily romantic atmosphere to further confuse his victims. For Jean Weiner, the abuse began even earlier at just 14 years old. She sought comfort in confession with Father Neil Magnus Keoghs, director of religious services, sharing with him childhood trauma involving sexual abuse. Instead of guiding her toward healing, Magnus used her vulnerability for his own gratification. What followed was a nightmare. Maskell and Magnus began summoning Jean for joint therapy sessions, which involved nude photographs, sexual acts, and psychological manipulation framed as spiritual healing. They told her these acts were part of God's forgiveness. Over time, Maskell escalated his control. He began taking Jean out of class without Magnus bringing her to his office alone, showing her sexual images and assaulting her under the pretense of spiritual awakening. He insisted her resistance to him was evidence of her sinfulness, telling her she wasn't open to the Holy Spirit. She internalized this as a sign she was inherently broken. I thought I must be a terrible person who didn't deserve God's forgiveness, she would later say. The abuse extended beyond Keogh's walls. Maskell's network included Dr. Christian Richter, a local gynecologist. Maskell brought girls to Richter under the guise of medical exams, often to ensure they weren't pregnant. During these visits, both men allegedly assaulted the girls under the pretense of health checks. Maskell boasted about these visits at a local auto repair shop. Me and the doctor, we take them back and give them exams, he reportedly told shop owner Bob Pfizer, who later recalled Maskell bragging about the control he had over the girls. The abuse wasn't confined to medical offices either. Maskell allegedly performed examinations in the school chapel and his office bathroom. Several survivors recalled being subjected to invasive and unnecessary procedures, all while being told it was for their own good. Most girls, terrified and confused, didn't fight back. Those who did faced terrifying consequences. Donna von Denbusch, one of Maskell's victims, gathered the courage to resist during her senior year. She struck him with her purse during an assault. His response was swift and chilling. He shoved a gun in her mouth and told her, "You're a troublemaker. You're trash. No one will ever believe you." Maskell reinforced his authority by reminding students of his education at Johns Hopkins and his connections in law enforcement. The message was clear. He was untouchable. Even teachers knew something was off. When girls begged not to be sent to Maskell's office, they were told, "We all know he's strange, but you still have to go." The fear was pervasive. The trauma inflicted on the girls at Archbishop Keogh High School didn't end with the abuse itself. It deepened with the fear manipulation and calculated silencing that followed. Father Joseph Maskell, cloaked in spiritual authority and shielded by institutional power, ensured that his victims remained voiceless. His methods weren't only physical, they were psychological and spiritual, designed to trap young minds in guilt, confusion, and fear. When students began to show signs of distress, poor behavior, emotional breakdowns, slipping grades, Maskell would call them out of class over the school intercom and summon them to his office. Everyone, even teachers, knew it was happening. But no one intervened. Some of the girls, like Teresa Lancaster, were manipulated into believing that what was happening was therapeutic. When she was a junior, Maskell told her his touch was godly. He said he was helping her heal from her guilt, helping her feel God's love. She was naked on his lap in his office when he said these things designed to distort her understanding of safety, affection, and trust. Teresa later said, "There was about a month or so when I actually thought he loved me." That twisted belief kept her from seeing the abuse for what it was, until the trauma became undeniable. Other girls were terrified from the start. Jean Weiner was just 14 when her nightmare began. She had gone to confession with Father Neil Magnus to talk about sexual abuse she had suffered earlier in life. But instead of comforting her, Magnus masturbated during her confession. From then on, Maskell and Magnus conducted joint counseling sessions with her. These sessions quickly turned into repeated sexual abuse, nude photographs, masturbation, coercion, and psychological torment. They claimed it was all part of helping her find God's forgiveness. Eventually, Maskell began isolating Jean. He removed her from class, took her on drives, and began abusing her alone. He showed her explicit images and told her she needed to open herself to the Holy Spirit. He said she didn't deserve God's love unless she cooperated. When she hesitated or resisted, he shamed her, making her feel unworthy of forgiveness, broken and dirty. In her young, traumatized mind, she believed she was being purified. And Maskell didn't act alone. He had built a network of accomplices, including doctors. Dr. Christian Richter, a gynecologist and friend of Maskell's, performed medical exams on the girls, often with Maskell present, under the pretense of checking for pregnancy. These were not legitimate checkups. Girls were touched inappropriately, sometimes abused during the exams. Richter, who denied wrongdoing before his death in 2006, admitted Maskell may have been in the room during appointments without parental consent, allegedly to help calm the girls. But the testimonies say otherwise. These were not acts of comfort but coordinated violations. For girls like Donna Fondenbosch, the abuse was a slow, grinding descent into fear. Maskell began targeting her during her senior year. She tried to fight back once, even swinging her purse at him, hoping he wouldn't dare to retaliate. But he did. He pulled a gun, shoved the barrel into her mouth, and told her she was worthless. "You're a troublemaker. You're trash. No one would believe you." He pointed to his degree from Johns Hopkins and reminded her of his standing. She believed him and stayed silent. Maskell used every tool at his disposal: spiritual guilt, academic authority, police connections, and brute force. He prostituted the girls, referring to the men abusing them as Brother Ed, Brother Ted, and Brother Bob. These weren't church officials. They were Maskell's connections, often older men, sometimes in uniform. Some paid him, He called it their extracurriculars. Jean would later realize he was prostituting us. To keep her quiet, Maskell told Jean that her own father, a police officer, would kill her if he found out she was spending time with older men. One day, he placed an unloaded gun to her head and pulled the trigger. He said her father would do worse. Jean lived in terror, and she wasn't the only one. Girls began to recognize the same men over and over. Uniformed police officers were sometimes present during the abuse. Some girls like von den Bosch remembered feeling drugged only to wake up with their clothes askew and Maskell standing nearby telling them how to behave so the men wouldn't be disturbed. Smile, he'd say. Make them feel comfortable. It wasn't just manipulation. It was psychological warfare. But amid this darkness, there was one adult who saw through the facade. One teacher who asked the right questions. Sister Catherine Sesnick. When Jean broke down during her sophomore year, Kathy asked her directly, "Are the priests hurting you, Jean?" Unable to speak, nodded. Kathy's response was immediate. "Go home and enjoy the summer. I'll take care of this." Other students recalled Kathy intervening as well, making up excuses when Maskell tried to pull girls from class, shielding them as best she could. But in doing so, she had drawn a dangerous line in the sand, and someone was watching. For more than 2 decades after Sister Kathy's murder, the case remained unsolved, buried under layers of silence, fear, and institutional protection. But in 1992, a memory shattered that silence. Jean Hargaden Weiner, who had seen Sister Kathy's body as a teenager, was flipping through her old high school yearbook when she came across photos of 2 familiar faces, Father Joseph Maskell and Father Neil Magnus. The sight jolted something deep and terrible within her. In an instant, repressed memories came flooding back. The abuse, the manipulation, and the horrifying day at the dump. For years, Jean's mind had protected her by burying the worst of her trauma. But now the truth surfaced with brutal clarity. That summer, Jean reported her abuse to the Archdiocese of Baltimore. The church's response was to remove Maskell from ministry temporarily for psychological evaluation. But the delay spoke volumes. It took 5 months for any real action, and even then, they claimed they couldn't find other victims to corroborate her story. Jean's lawyers decided to try something simple. They placed an ad in the Baltimore Sun asking if anyone remembered abuse at KO in the late 1960s and early 70s. The result was explosive. More than 30 women came forward. One of them was Teresa Lancaster. Teresa, too, had buried her memories trying to protect her devout Catholic mother. But after her mother passed in 1993, the floodgates opened. She began having nightmares and flashbacks. She recalled being sexually abused by Maskell in his office under the guise of spiritual counseling. He'd stripped her, told her his touch was godly, and convinced her that his abuse was a form of healing. Sometimes he played Irish music. Other times he threatened her with a gun or warned her she'd be sent to a girls' juvenile facility. Like John, Teresa had believed she was alone. Now, she realized the abuse had been widespread and systematic. In 1994, Jean and Teresa filed a civil lawsuit against Maskell, Dr. Christian Richter, the Archdiocese of Baltimore, and the School Sisters of Notre Dame. They sought $40 million in damages. It was the first time the full scope of Maskell's crimes and the church's complicity were thrust into the public eye. But the defense didn't fight the facts, they attacked the memories. They brought in Dr. Paul McHugh, a Catholic psychiatrist famous for discrediting repressed memory testimony. McHugh argued that traumatic memories could not be forgotten and then recovered, rendering the women's accounts scientifically invalid. It was the 1990s, a time when skepticism toward recovered memories was gaining legal traction. Despite the consistency of the women's stories and supporting evidence from other survivors, the case was dismissed. Maryland law required abuse victims to file lawsuits within 3 years of remembering the abuse. The judge ruled that repressed memories didn't reset that legal clock. Even though he admitted the women were credible, he said the law and expert testimony tied his hands. The survivors lost their case in court, but they had won something far more valuable. They had shattered the silence. The media took notice. The public began asking questions, and law enforcement was forced to act. Later that year, Baltimore police received a startling call from a man named William Story, a gravedigger who had worked at Holy Cross Cemetery. In 1991, 3 years earlier, Story said Maskell had ordered him to dig a massive hole in the cemetery, 12 feet wide, 12 feet long. Maskell told him he needed to bury boxes of confidential files. At the time, Story hadn't thought much of it. But after hearing about the lawsuit in the news, he realized those boxes might contain critical evidence. He gave police a map. In August 1994, police excavated the site. What they found was staggering psychological evaluations of Keough students, and according to one detective, nude photographs of underage girls. "We found hard evidence," said the detective, known only as Deep Throat. "These girls had their tops open. I saw them with my own damn eyes." It should have been the breakthrough that brought Maskell to justice. But something inexplicable happened. The most damning pieces of evidence vanished. Officially, the boxes were reported to contain only cancelled checks and test evaluations. The photos gone. The evidence had disappeared somewhere between the cemetery and the evidence room. What should have been a slam-dunk case against Father Joseph Maskell began to unravel again, this time not because of legal technicalities, but because of blatant evidence tampering. The detective, still bitter decades later, insisted he had seen the photographs with his own eyes. The images of underage girls in compromising positions had been physical proof of Maskell's crimes. Their disappearance meant one thing: someone was actively protecting him. As soon as police began to explore a connection between Maskell and Sister Kathy's murder, the resistance intensified. The same detective received a phone call from a superior. The message was stark and unmistakable. "Listen, kid, this is a career buster. We knew who the hell killed her back when it happened. You're gonna find out things you shouldn't find out. Just let it go." The implication was clear. The truth was dangerous, and pursuing it might cost him everything. Maskell had built walls of power around himself, his brother in the police department, his relationships with top officials, and the full weight of the Catholic Church behind him. Before police could question him further, Maskell checked himself into a psychiatric treatment center, citing stress and anxiety. The timing was perfect. It stalled the investigation long enough for him to quietly flee the United States. He slipped away to Ireland and resumed work as a priest. The archdiocese claimed they didn't know where he had gone until 1996, when an Irish bishop finally reached out. By then, it was too late. The investigation lost momentum. Law enforcement let the case go cold again. The damage was irreparable. Father Neil Magnus, who had co-abused girls with Maskell, died in 1988. Dr. Christian Richter, the gynecologist accused of participating in and enabling the abuse, passed in 2006. And in 2001, Maskell himself died in Ireland, never having been charged with a single crime. The men who had abused, silenced, and possibly murdered were beyond the reach of earthly justice. For the survivors, it felt like the final betrayal. But Sister Kathy's story refused to be buried. Her students, those she had tried to protect, were not done fighting. And while justice in the courtroom had failed them, they were about to ignite a new investigation that would capture the world's attention. By 2013, more than 40 years had passed since Sister Kathy's murder. The perpetrators were dead. The case remained unsolved. And for many, it seemed justice would never come. But for Gemma Hoskins, one of Sister Kathy's former students, the story wasn't over. At 62, recently retired from a long teaching career, Gemma found herself haunted by the memory of the teacher who had changed her life. Kathy Sesnick had been the reason she became an educator. Her absence still burned like an open wound. Gemma couldn't forget, and she wasn't willing to move on. She reached out to Tom Nugent, a journalist who had written about the case in the 1990s. "Do you remember me?" she asked him. "When are you coming back here to finish this?" Nugent didn't need much persuading. "I don't want to live in a world where this kind of thing is swept under the rug," he said. Together they began to dig again, not with subpoenas or police warrants, but with emails, memories, and determination. Gemma created a Facebook group for Archbishop Keogh alumni, gently asking if anyone remembered rumors of abuse or misconduct. The response was overwhelming. Women who had stayed silent for decades suddenly found the courage to speak. Their stories, scattered like puzzle pieces, began to align into a horrifyingly consistent narrative. Some alumni accused Gemma of witch hunting. Others tried to silence her. The school's official page even banned her. But it didn't matter. The women who needed to speak had finally found one another. Among them was Abby Schaub, a retired nurse who had also been in Sister Kathy's class. If Gemma was the heart of the investigation, Abby was its brain. While Gemma used her people skills to build connections, Abby scoured public records, old newspaper archives, and property maps. Together, they were unstoppable. "We were two halves that fit together perfectly," Gemma would say later. They built a private online community where survivors could share their stories without fear. They tracked down old witnesses, spoke to family members of dead suspects, and requested long-buried police files. Their amateur investigation quickly outpaced anything official law enforcement had done in decades. In 2014, Jean Venner returned to Baltimore County Police to tell her story again, this time to Detective Dave Jacoby. Encouraged by the renewed attention, he even traveled to New Jersey to re-interview Father Gerard Koob. While Koob had no new information, the meeting confirmed that the case was very much alive. But the women's work went far beyond the search for a killer. They were building something much deeper, a community of healing. For many of the survivors, it was the first time they felt heard, believed, and supported. Teresa Lancaster emerged as a powerful voice, not just for herself, but for others. She joined SNAP, the survivors network of those abused by priests, and began lobbying lawmakers to extend the statute of limitations for sexual abuse cases in Maryland. In 2010, the Archdiocese finally offered Lancaster a settlement of $40,000 and a formal apology. She took the money, but rejected the offer to meet with the Archbishop. "I said, I'm done with you people in your skirts and strange men in their outfits," she recalled. "It will be a cold day in hell before I sit across from one of them." Sister Kathy's story wasn't over, it was transforming. And in 2017, it would reach a global audience. When The Keepers premiered on Netflix in May 2017, it stunned viewers around the world. The documentary series followed the story of Sister Kathy Sesnick's murder and the widespread abuse at Archbishop Keough High School. It gave voice to the survivors, exposed the systemic corruption that had buried the case for decades, and reignited public interest in the investigation. Viewers were horrified not just by the abuse, but by how thoroughly the institutions they trusted had failed to protect children. The story hit a nerve and sparked outrage. In the aftermath of the series, the Archdiocese of Baltimore finally acknowledged that Father Joseph Maskell had been credibly accused of sexually abusing minors. Financial settlements were paid to survivors, and more victims came forward. But for the women who had fought for decades, the victories were bittersweet. Money could not undo the trauma. Apologies could not bring back the years lost to fear, depression, and silence. And Sister Kathy, beloved Kathy, was still gone. Yet something remarkable had happened. Kathy's death, meant to silence the truth, had instead given rise to a movement. The students she had once protected had become warriors of truth. They had created a legacy more powerful than any court ruling, a community where victims were heard, believed, and healed together. They had taken the shame imposed on them by others and transformed it into strength. Jean Vayner, who had once believed no one would ever understand what she had endured, found peace in the support of fellow survivors. "Now, I have this communal sense of, we believe you, we trust you," she said. "I didn't have that 40 years ago. Every step of the way is a struggle, but I get healthier and healthier." Gemma Hoskins, still digging, still calling for justice, is driven by the memory of the teacher who made her believe in the power of good. "She was the reason I became a teacher," she said. "I've never met anyone like her." Detectives continue to follow leads. Living suspects have been identified. But without hard evidence, no arrests have been made. The case remains open, its resolution uncertain. Still, for many survivors, justice has taken on a new meaning. They've reclaimed their voices, their stories, and their dignity. And they've ensured that Sister Kathy's courage will never be forgotten. She died because she dared to stand up to evil. But in doing so, she inspired others to do the same. Her murder was meant to silence truth forever. Instead, it became the catalyst for truth to rise. And though she could not save her students in life, her death helped them save one another. That may be the most fitting tribute to Sister Catherine Sesnick, a martyr not of faith alone, but of fierce compassion, unrelenting truth, and the enduring power of those who refuse to stay silent. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Your support truly means the world to me. If this video brought you value or resonated with you in any way, feel free to leave a little comment or hit subscribe so we can keep sharing more moments together. See you in the next one.